1 week. One simple week. 7 days, 168 hours. That's all it took to go from massive dubs in Trials of Osiris to kind of a gigantic L. What's going on, Guardians? My name is the Black Link. In this video, we're going to be talking about some changes made to the Trials of Osiris game mode, as well as a very recent one that seems to have gotten a lot of panties really bunched up. And believe me, I'm not taking a shot at the streamer PvPs when I say that. Okay, so last week we had a video talking about Trials of Osiris, changes that Bungie made this season that have turned the game mode into an absolute unquestioned success. The first week of Trials last weekend had the most players in Destiny 2's history entering the in-game Pinnacle PvP game mode. Like seriously, there were more people going to the Lighthouse than had ever gone to the Lighthouse before, and even if you weren't somebody who made it to the Lighthouse last weekend, you were probably someone who jumped into Trials for the first time, was able to get at least up to 7 wins and get a ton of Trials of Osiris based rewards. It was fantastic. Bungie implemented changes like adding solo matchmaking, changing up the matchmaking algorithm so that teams that are already flawless who have a full card, 7 wins already done, basically get matched with other teams that have 7 wins. They do this Trials card-based matchmaking where it tries to put you together with other people who have similar wins to you. They completely changed up the reward structure. They added a reputation reward system to Saint 14. It was fantastic changes that made Trials a joy to play. I talked a lot about it last week. I jumped into Trials last week, got 7 wins really quickly, really easily, and was showered with loot for it. It was a fantastic change that made the game mode worthwhile, not only for the best of the best, not only for the people who have the 3 stacks to jump into, it made it worthwhile for anyone who is interested in getting that Trials loot to at least jump in and try for a few games. And then Bungie made a few changes this week that seems to have, well, set the entire thing back on fire. So what did Bungie change this week in Trials? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at that. In the TWAB this week, they talked about some upcoming changes that are now active in the Trials of Osiris game mode that included some matchmaking changes as well as some penalties they're adding in. Here's what Bungie had to say. We aren't satisfied with the matchmaking experience for players after 7 wins. That area of matchmaking has a significantly higher rate of 5-0 games than we would like, so we are enabling a flawless matchmaking pool. However, we want to make sure that there are enough flawless players to maintain good matchmaking times, so we are waiting until Friday afternoon to turn this on, and we will be watching player reactions and matchmaking analytics all weekend to make sure it's behaving properly. Well, there was also kind of a mistake with that. They didn't wait until Friday afternoon to turn that flawless matchmaking pool. They turned it on immediately when Trials went live. They had to kind of roll that out roll that back a little bit later and make an announcement about it. But essentially, they noticed last week teams that had already gone flawless were having a lot of 5-0 games because, of course, some of those teams were running into players who maybe don't play Trials of Osiris, but who had already gotten to their 7 wins. And so what Bungie's trying to do here is they don't want those flawless teams farming lower skilled people in the Trials playlist. So when you go flawless now, you're essentially thrown into a separate matchmaking pool where you'll only face other flawless individuals. That kind of creates a couple problems in practice, as I'm sure some of you have either seen or at least heard about. In addition to the fact that this matchmaking went live immediately with Trials, which basically took a lot of the higher skilled players and immediately threw them up against each other, even if they were playing solo. Separating the matchmaking pool like this, while I definitely understand why Bungie would want to do it, presents the same sort of problem that Trials had before the update last week, in which teams are being forced into a queue where they're waiting longer to get into matchmaking time. Some of the matchmaking times yesterday were like 10 to 12 minutes before you could get into a match. And of course, the connections definitely suffered there. Because of course, in this pseudo skill-based matchmaking environment that's being activated for flawless players in Trials, The game is ignoring connection quality to just try to throw you up against other flawless individuals. Now, some of the community managers did come out yesterday after they announced some of these changes, and did say that eventually, if the system can't find another flawless team to throw you up against, it will throw you back into the general trials pool. But a lot of people were noticing much longer matchmaking times and a much degraded overall experience in Trials of Osiris. Now, I get it. They're sweats. Who cares how the sweats feel? I understand that feeling, and like I said, I even understand why Bungie made this change. I would imagine that they were riding high after the massive praise Trials of Osiris got last weekend. Again, those changes that they made to make the game mode more welcoming and more open to lesser skilled players and players who maybe just don't play a lot of PvP was a unilateral good move. It was fantastic. I think Bungie might have gotten a little high off of that and said, well, you know what, we should also probably try to protect people from getting farmed by the higher skill players in the in-game pinnacle PvP game mode, and went ahead and implemented some of these changes. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna make a few of you mad about this. I do think this is a little bit of a mistake. I definitely don't want the triple stacked 3.0 players farming the 0.3.0 KD players endlessly just because they've played 7 games and have to be thrown into that matchmaking pool. That's not healthy at all, and it's one of the reasons why Trials wasn't working before. But I also think it's just as bad to take players who are performing well and punish them for it. By taking all of those teams that have been performing well in the game mode essentially out of the normal player pool and saying, okay, you guys can only play each other now because you've done something wrong in being good at the game, like you're cheaters. Well, that kind of creates the same problem that Trials had before, in which case the player pool, especially on PC, was so small it was just the same people waiting 10 minutes to fight the same people over and over and over again in games that functionally were not fun to engage in. And by functionally, I mean via connection, lag, all of that kind of stuff. Siphoning away these players into their own matchmaking pool creates, I think, more problems than you're really going to solve by just letting them play within the normal player pool. It also seemingly does a pretty bad job of identifying who's gone flawless that week, as like I said before, there were players who were immediately being thrown seemingly into this matchmaking pool at the very start of Trials. It looked like it was taking in their lifetime attempts to go flawless or successes at going flawless into account when it comes to that matchmaking, and that is definitely unacceptable. Even if this system were to remain in place, Bungie would really need to tune that out. It should not be taking into account whether you've gone flawless into the past before throwing you into that flawless only matchmaking pool. And then, of course, I can also see things from the perspective of streamers out there who like to do flawless carries. You're essentially making their job not necessarily impossible, but a lot harder to drag people who are not that good at PvP to the lighthouse as a service, on a stream or something like that. Overall, I just think it's not the right change to have made to this game mode. It's like Bungie last week. They had this virtually perfect cake. They baked it right, they got the frosting on there, they even put a little bit of a cherry on top with the changes to the reward system and all of that. Then they brought it out, cut it up into pieces, let people take some bites out of it. Everybody was like, this is a fantastic cake, it's damn near perfect. The only thing doesn't need to be baked anymore. The only other things maybe are garnishes that you could throw on right now to make this the perfect cake. And then Bungie was like, okay, great to hear it. We're gonna put 3 times the amount of frosting on and throw it back in the oven. It's like, why would you do that? It's unnecessary. I think Bungie should probably look at reverting some of these matchmaking changes. But some of the other stuff that they've got going into effect, they talked about in this week's swab, absolutely worthwhile. Like they're adding quitter penalties back to Trials of Osiris. Well, one of the problems we saw last weekend were when triple stack teams were going up against other triple stack teams, they would quit out of the game. They would only play against teams of solo players because they figured that would be an easier win. Well, Bungie said next week there's going to be quitter penalties being added back into the Trials of Osiris game mode, just like there is for the Glory playlist. You're going to get a 30-minute lockout if you quit too many games. Fantastic change. They're also going to be adding in a freelance Trials playlist. I think that's a much better idea than just taking all of the flawless players and throwing them into their own playpen. And in the final kind of cherry on top, they're also going to be changing up Trials game modes starting next week with the first Trials lab capture zone trials, which sounds fantastic to me. Overall, I think Bungie has still done a really fantastic job with Trials of Osiris. I'm so glad that it's so much more welcoming to newer players and lesser skilled players who may not go flawless every single week, but still have an opportunity to jump into the Pinnacle PvP game mode and get some rewards. But I think this last change with the matchmaking might have been a bit of a step too far. And so hopefully Bungie can keep tweaking and maybe untweak a few things to kind of get some of the magic of last week back. But anyways, those are just my thoughts on some of the Trials changes a week in. I thought it was rather funny that we went from universal praise to quite a bit of frustration within a week. But anyways, those are just my thoughts. Be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. I'm sure some of you are completely happy with the flawless matchmaking pool, and I'd love to hear how you feel about the issue. But if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. I'm out for now. Probably gonna go play some more Trials of Osiris. As always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.